Professor Doug Morrow, welcome to the Tick Boot Camp podcast.
Thanks, Rich. I'm glad we were finally able to put this together.
Yeah, it's been a long time coming, Doug. And what's one of the things that's interesting for me personally is you're actually the first personal friend that I've had on the podcast, despite doing almost 600 episodes. The first Rocky Pointer, one of the only people that we have ever interviewed from my own home community. I just want folks to know that you are a polymath, Doug. I mean, you're one of the most talented people I know. You're a professor, or soon to be ex-professor, which is exciting. We should talk a little bit about that. You're about to retire. You're a professional musician. You're a dad. You're an athlete, a cyclist. I mean, you just have a lot of different interests. So why don't you just give folks a little bit on your background?
Well, you know, as you mentioned, I'm getting ready to retire after 30 something years teaching in the radio, television, and film program at Hofstra University. And I've been thinking a lot because retirement really gets you thinking about your life. Um, I really believe, a number of good chapters left in my life. I don't want to really ask for a lot more, but I'd like to enjoy it for a lot longer. I am really enjoying my life and lucky enough to have a lot of love under my roof and old enough and wise enough to know it. But my background is really born and raised in Stony Brook, and had a wonderful childhood. Okay, always out and about. All right, and I got very involved in music. My identity back in high school was the drummer, one of a couple of guys that were very serious about music and played the drums. And that led me eventually to the Berklee School of Music up in Boston. And like many people who attend Berklee, I didn't get a degree. I was there for a couple of years. I was recruited. I went on the road out of Berklee and performed for a while. I was with a production of Godspell, did other things, wound up in New York. Okay. And as a musician, had a pretty good career going. And then it was interesting. This is the early 1990s, and the drum machine came out. And drummers were maybe one of the first to kind of be displaced with technology because just the clock thing was something that they were able to emulate, quite easily with early digital technology. So they had these machines that you could program. Okay. And I actually bought a really nice computer that I would program for people as well as play live drums. Now, I never stopped playing live drums and performing. I also like to write music, and I was involved with a few soundtracks and jingle work in New York and things like that. So I did a lot of different things with music, but I knew it was all changing. So I thought I better get back to school. And my connection I had done a few things where I was on sound stages and worked with actors and directors. Uh, and I thought I would get involved with film and TV, really doing audio work. So as that progressed, I got into a program in New York to study communications, and I did. I took off with audio, but I really found myself, I really liked all aspects of it. So I like to shoot, film and video back then, edit, all right, and all types of aspects. And as I got more and more involved in that side of things in New York City, I actually wound up doing a lot of um, lighting and shooting work. And I was able to get a union card. I worked out of the United Nations for a year during the General Assembly, and I got a union card out of that. And that was very difficult back in those days, but I got really lucky with that. And so I progressed in New York. I never stopped banging the drums. And then as I got more into film and TV, there were a couple of good communication schools right in the area. My first opportunity to teach was out at St. John's, and I liked it. I used to go out as an adjunct one day a week and teach. And then I went to Rutgers University and did that. And then I wound up out at Hofstra. And Hofstra has quite a school of communication and quite a facility, the largest soundstage on Long Island. Um, they do a lot with podcasting, and radio. The film program was rated number 16 by, I believe it was Hollywood Reporter, and 16 in the world, okay, for film programs. And I'm trying to think, and the television program just continued to grow and grow and grow. So I was there kind of what you would say at the right time. And they turned around and they said to me, um, program's growing. We like what you're doing. And would you like to come on board as a faculty member? Well, I liked doing it as an adjunct, and I had a pretty successful business in New York. I would freelance and piecemeal things. I did a lot with HBO and I did a lot with CBS, blah, blah, blah. And but I knew it was too good an opportunity not to try. And I got involved, full time out at Hofstra with the program. Here I am 32 years later, getting ready to retire from it. So I guess you could say I liked it. All
Yeah,
right.
so tell us a little bit about what happened during the course of the last couple of weeks. I understand that you were honored by some of your former students and folks in your program.
It was absolutely beautiful. I went every spring. The senior students, they have a class where the group produces material, and some students will write their own shows or pilots. They usually do a music performance show. Sometimes there's fashion shows. I don't teach it. A good friend and colleague of mine does, and he does a phenomenal job with it. But a lot of it, I do teach a senior level thesis class, and a lot of sort of the perspective as at Hofstra is once you're at these capstone classes, we really, kind of step back because all the students are ready to fly the plane, if you know what I mean. And we let them do things. And the show that I was at last week was called The Herbies. It's the Lawrence Herbert School of Communication. And Lawrence Herbert was the guy who invented the Pantone scheme,
Hmm.
okay, which matches colors. He figured a way to communicate colors around the world back in the day where you couldn't match colors from one country to the next, or certainly overseas, that type of thing. And he was a Hofstra alum. He dedicated money to our school, and it's the Lawrence Herbert School. So each year the seniors do the Herbie Awards, and they honor all like the best of all the work that the students produce, and they produce a lot out of the school. And then they honor one faculty member. And this is for senior television students. And this year, it was really something, Rich. They asked me if they could interview me for my retirement. They'd like to get my perspective, at being at Hofstra for 32 years. So I said, of course, and then um, what happened from there was I do this interview, and they know, and I told them, you don't really want me in front of the camera. Okay, you want me behind the camera. But they were brave. They took this on and they interviewed me. And then at the last question of the interview was, and how does it feel to be this year's faculty honoree? And I
That's
had no
cool.
idea. And they used it, the video. It was really funny because you could see I was speechless. They had a good time with me. But they did a beautiful job. They rolled in this video. And they also interviewed a lot of students I've taught at the school about, taking classes with me. And I was extremely touched. I really was. There were a couple hundred people that were there, students and family. We're getting close to finishing up now, and they are so talented, Rich. I tell you, I'm amazed, and I love to see what they do. I worked on the Emmys when I was in New York, and they didn't really have much on the Hofstra students. This was a tight, well produced, and I was told that they're making they did a line cut which went out live that night, and they're doing just a couple of tweaks, and then it will have a home. So if you like, when it's all done, I'll send you the link, and you
Yeah,
can see
that'd be
what.
great. Yeah, and we can put it into show notes so folks who are listening to this podcast can track it down as well. So thank you. So Doug, I want to walk back a little bit further to your early life, and talk about what it was like to grow up on Long Island. I mean, we're here in the Line Belt. Some people we debate all the time about whether or not Connecticut New York, specifically Long Island or Pennsylvania, is the lime capital of the world. Pennsylvania seems to be outpacing the rest of us recently with diagnoses. But living in this tri-state area is very difficult for folks because of the amount of ticks and Lyme disease. So, what was it like during your childhood when you were growing up in Stony Brook? Were you tick aware? Were you Lyme aware, or is this something that was happening without you knowing that you were in potential danger?
Well, it's an interesting story, Rich, because when I was young, I started off, I was born in Smithtown. And I'm very cognizant of a couple of years. My dad one in my life, Dave Morrow, built a beautiful house down on 50 Acre Road in Smithtown. And it was real farm country back then when I was a little guy. I think I was 5 years old when we moved there. And there was a giant farm field, across the street. And then there was all this woods. And then you had Nessaquag kind of right there. I could ride my bicycle to the beach. And I had two older brothers. And I was with my older brothers all the time. And we basically lived the life, didn't have to come home for lunch, had to be home for dinner. Okay, unless you called, and arrange, you were eating at a friend's house or something like that. And then we were, in summertime, you had to be home by dark. That was it. So we were outside, go outside and play. That we heard that all the time, right? And I loved it. Summertime, it was riding my bike to the beach. I had a brother who was a lifeguard who let me come down and meet him at the beach all the time. And we played baseball in the farm fields. But down the road from us was actually the sod farm that grew all the grass for Shea Stadium. So we would go down there. I mean, I can't believe we were allowed to do this, but we would have, we play ball down in the sod farm, and it was just really being the Huck Finn back in the day. So what was sad about that story was, I guess by the time I was 8 years old, my dad had rheumatoid arthritis, and he literally passed away from better living through chemistry. They were bombarding him with chemicals at that point. This was, I guess it was 67, 66, 67. He got pretty sick from this rheumatoid arthritis and had a hip replacement and just really started to go downhill. And then one summer, I think it was a summer maybe after first grade for me, he just got really sick and nobody expected him to pass. But, doctors weren't talking to each other. They didn't know what medicines they were giving him. That's what I remember from it. That's what I remember my mom telling me. And I loved him dearly. My life, my memory of him is walking with a cane, and he passed, and I was heartbroken. I'm fortunate, I guess I was close to 8 years old. I was eight when he passed. So I'm old enough, I remember him well. And then I guess about 2 years later, my mom remarried. Um, and she met a guy in St. James. It was a nice story. Uh, he uh, my mom was a school nurse, and I'll get back to that because it played into the way we were raised. But at any rate, at the school that she was the school nurse, the principal had a next door neighbor in St. James who was a widower, and he connected the two of them. And I didn't want my mom to have anything to do with this guy. Here I am now, I guess 9.5, something like that, close to 10. And I'll never forget the first date. I'm at the window, waiting, and he pulls up in a 65 Mustang. Okay. Gets out. He looked like Sean Connery, the dark suit with the thin tie, handsome guy. He was Greek. Ted, dad too for me was Ted Pavlonis. And um, I'm like, Mom, this is good, Mom. We're doing good here. I like this guy already. And lo and behold, I guess it was close, maybe a year courtship, a year planning the wedding. And then we were a Brady Bunch. So four Morrows and four Pavlonis siblings went together and we became a family. So there were a lot of us in and out of the house. And I was the youngest in the Morrows, second youngest in the Pavlonis family. Excuse me. Anyway, I couldn't ask for a better dad. It was, unconditional love. He raised me. I was with him for many years as I formed as a man, my thoughts, my ideas. He was a journalist, very smart man, kind. So I believe I have a lot of his attributes, or certainly tried to. And people have told me that who knew him. It's funny because he had one son, and people would always get me and my youngest brother Peter mixed up. They would always think I was Ted's son. And I think it's the way I kind of moved and, mimicked his mannerisms maybe a little bit. So anyway, there was a tough point there. It's hard to lose your dad as a kid, but boy, I came out of it pretty well. I really did. And my mom had a wonderful life with Ted for many years. But going back to those days, and when the two families formed, I was only 10. We moved to Setauket at that point for a bigger house so that the two families could get together. And same thing. I was out and riding my bike every day. I used to caddy as a kid. I was on the golf course, all right, and caddying. That's how I paid for drum lessons back in the day and all that stuff. Cutting lawns, as I was a little guy and started to earn a few bucks. We were a big family, so they offered a lot of love. There wasn't a lot of money, around. But it was really a beautiful environment. But my mom being a school nurse, I did know about ticks. There were things that she was concerned about. Okay. Not overly cautious. I think she might have found one or two back in the day, on me, and we were always kind of, warned, and it was brought up. Okay. And then they retired. I guess I left Berkeley, and they had retired from New York down to Long Island down to North Carolina. So it was the end of my mom kind of checking her, saying, and I had been out of the house a number of years. Um, but on that level, or the tick dialogue, or the uniqueness of Long Island with that was over at that point. But I also happened to have married the girl who lived right around the block for me in Setauket. I never knew her as a kid. I used to play baseball and stuff with her brothers. But by the time I got back from college, and then, really I was playing quite a bit and I was in New York, but I knew Diane and I kind of reintroduced myself. And it's like forget the brothers, who's the sister over there, okay? And we started to date, and Diane would come in, and Diane's just a very smart woman, and she was very aware as well that there were issues with ticks. All right, so we both really like to be outside, and I'm more of a beach person than Diane is, but we love to walk, ride bikes. Um, and we were always cautious. And over many years, I guess, again, maybe one or two ticks that we found, no real illness. I'm not hearing you.
Doug, and when you say we're cautious, let's first focus on your mother finding ticks on you. Did your mother find ticks on you because you were checking on a regular basis? Did your mom sort of have a check protocol, or is it something that she stumbled across on you? I mean, how did that surface? Because one of the things that folks on this podcast have heard from me is I have a very aggressive mother. She's not a nurse, but I grew up in a community that was infested with ticks. Our house is built on and as a whole development was built on a former asparagus farm surrounded by woods. We had ticks on us and our animals all the time. So we checked every single day when we came in. We had to check for ticks, and I'm wondering if that was a similar experience for you.
Not really. No. I don't think it was almost like daily, but I would say like during the summertime. And again, when I was a little guy, it was never alarming, but I think she would run her fingers through my hair and, around my ears and be cognizant, when I was tell me, hygiene and stuff to make sure. And I remember maybe after the first one, then I was kind of aware. So I think that they were caught relatively quick, no bouts of Lyme's or anything, or no real follow-up doctor's things. She probably knew a little bit more of what she might have been looking for if she was going to take me to the doctor, but there was really none of that. And then I was out of the house at 17 to go to college. And but always remind, just the kind of thing to be safe. And I guess after the couple of episodes, I always made sure, I would check in between my fingers, my toes, back of my ears, things like that. And then Diane was very hands-on with it, just with constantly reminding me, if we spent the day, okay, check yourself, just make sure you check yourself well. Okay, that type of thing. Nowadays, we have a spray bottle at the front door, of a repellent that she makes. It's an organic repellent, but we believe it works. And I cut the grass today before I went out to cut the grass. I roll up my pants and spray, and use this stuff. Um, but the early days, that's the way I kind of remember it. Okay. And so I don't think I never had a tick get real big on me or really in bed, or any of that type of thing. That didn't happen.
So Doug, can you share with us what Diane's repellent mixture is?
I can get that for you.
Okay, so what
Okay.
we'll do is, and you don't have to do it now, but what we can do is maybe you can get it for us and we can put it in the show notes since you're finding it to be an effective mixture, and we'll make it available to folks in our community to see if they decide they want to use that as opposed to some of the other tools like permethrin and DEET. We're the agnostic podcast. Whatever works for you, and
Right.
there's a boatload of research on the effectiveness of some of these synthetic tools, but there's a lot of anecdotal experience with folks using different types of essential oils and
Right.
such, and that works as well. So yeah, if you could share Diane's recipe with us, we'd appreciate that.
Now she's here. I don't know if you want me to just, ask her,
Yeah, you might as well. If she wouldn't mind, that would be great. Why don't we
Sure.
let her come on and join us for this brief part of the podcast? Uh, hey, Diane, how are you?
Good, Rich. How are you doing?
Good. Well, thank you for joining us on the podcast. I guess you didn't know that we were going to do a Morrow family interview
No.
today. So Doug shared with us that you mix a repellent, a natural repellent, and
Yes.
folks in our community like to hear what folks are using. So if you wouldn't mind, could you share with us what you use in your repellent recipe?
Sure. I mean, I like to get a lot of essential oils. So I use lemongrass because I've read ticks are repelled by citrus smells. Eucalyptus oil, maybe some tea tree oil. I usually mostly go with the lemongrass a lot and the eucalyptus. And I fill my spray bottle with a good 3/4 of a bottle of white vinegar. And then I just go heavy on my essential oil drops into it, little bit of water, and then we just spritz it on us. Now it dissipates pretty quickly, so you have to take it out with you when you're doing outdoor stuff and continue to spray yourself.
Right. And
But,
that's
it's
what.
worked for me.
Yeah, so you're using the vinegar as the carrying solution.
Yes, exactly. Yep.
Oh, interesting. Well, thank you, Dan.
And I do go heavy with the essential drops, like 20, 25 drops in the solution.
And are you using all three of the oils at the same time, or
You can vary them. I tend to go heavy on the lemongrass or lemon and sometimes eucalyptus, even lavender works. So whatever you have, but
Like 20 drops of each?
yeah,
Okay.
yeah, yeah. But whatever you have that, just is very powerful in smell.
so? Again, just since I have you, Diane, is that what you used on Antonio during his childhood, so that you would keep him tick free, or was that?
If he would stick around for me to let him get sprayed, but he usually ran away. So,
Yeah, all right.
but yes, he would use a little bit of it.
Well,
Yes.
that's good. So well, thank you, Diane, for sharing that
You're
with us, and
welcome.
we're going to put that in our show notes as well.
Great.
Okay.
Take care.
All right.
Thanks.
And then the other thing, Rich, that I'll tell you we've used that really does seem to help. We have a lot of lavender planted around the house because it's also, seems to be a deer repellent plant. And we have a lot of things that get munched now by the deer. So lavender, is pretty and I guess repels the deer a little bit. And then I had an arborist when I first moved to the house in Rocky Point, who lived next door, and he does organic spraying, but he also recommended to me. He liked the tick tubes, and he explained those to me. And I've been buying tick tubes now for probably 20 years, at least 15 years. All right. And I place them around the fence. And, I think it helps. I think also, I forget, at one point I had a good friend who gave me a bug, went to one of the nurseries that sells, hundreds of bugs or whatever that was supposed to be tick, um, that they, ate the ticks or whatever type thing. Um, that I have not kept up with. All right. But the tubes I have, and I do, Diane chases Antonio and I around with the spray bottle. If we don't put it on, she'll catch up with us.
And so tick tubes are a really cool addition as well. And of course, what the tick tubes are used for, folks, those of you who are unfamiliar with them, is that there is some either cotton or some other product in there that generally has permethrin or some other kind of tick spray on it, and then the mice take that
Right.
and use it for nesting. And because the first blood meal in most cases for a tick is going to be a mouse. The saccharide will then get onto the skin of the I'm sorry, onto the fur of the mice, and then when the ticks come in to bite the mice, the ticks die. So it's generally a very effective tool for reducing the tick population in a community. Some folks, it's just in case of folks who want to make tick tubes on their own, some folks will use dryer lint and they'll spray permethrin on them, and they'll use the tubes from either from a paper towels or from a toilet paper roll. But one of the challenges you have to be careful about if you're going to use that is that if you have cats, you don't want the cats to eat a mouse that has permethrin on it, because it could be fatal to the cat. So we always want to be careful when we're introducing these types of products into the environment, and whether or not you have, companion animals that might be negatively affected by that.
Right.
But there again, it's a great tool in reducing the tick population, is a very wise thing to do. So Doug, do you generally spray anything or put anything down in your yard to try to reduce the tick population?
No, no, we don't. I've really tried to become organic with things because as I've gotten older, I've seen Long Island change. And because I'm such a beach fan, it's why I bought the house in Rocky Point and I walk to the beach from my house. But anything, what all I put on my grass is Malorgolite, and which is really, I think, a lot of chicken poop, and that's it. So I really try and stay pretty organic with everything, because whatever washes off our lawns here are going right into the water,
Yeah.
down the street, into the sound.
Or into the groundwater.
Or into the groundwater, right?
Yeah.
So, I have beach grass, and it's amazing. People tell me how nice the lawn looks. I cut it really short. It's all green when you cut it short. So it's a lot of weeds and stuff, but people don't even notice as long as you cut it short. So I don't water it because, again, of water issues that happen quite a bit here on Long Island now with sprinklers. But, that's just kind of my approach to it. So we don't do much chemically, really anything. And I'm very proud. I can tell you, we've been asked a number of times to be in the Rocky Point Historical Society's garden show and things like that. Diane has a particularly green thumb, so the yard is beautiful. I love hanging out here in the summer. I'm looking forward to retiring now.
Yeah, and I think you're also wise in the way that you're keeping the grass cut low, because of course one of the greatest threats to a tick is going to be the heat, right? So I mean, if you have your grass down low, you're going to increase the temperature in that area of the lawn, and because the ticks need moisture, so keeping your grass dry as well is another another wise approach. You're reducing the likelihood of having ticks. And one of the mistakes that so many people have when they want to have these, traditionally green, luscious lawns, is they keep them wet all the time, and all you're doing is creating a habitat that is tick friendly, and you're increasing the likelihood of getting a tick bite. And I'm sorry, 80% of the people who have Lyme disease are sick as a result of a tick bite they get in their own yard. So
Right.
if we're creating a habitat for ticks, we're going to put ourselves in a position where we have a greater likelihood of jeopardy. So Doug, let's
Right.
talk about that, because one of the reasons why I've been excited to have you on this podcast, despite it being, I guess, a couple of years since we've finally been able to get together with everyone's busy schedules, is that your family had a really, really scary experience. In
Oh, yeah.
particular, you had a really, really scary experience. So Amanda's going to take you through that. But why don't you share with our listeners, what that experience was like, and how bad it got for you.
All right. So, I should just tell the story then. I guess Matt will get into things that he wants to get into in detail with it.
Yep.
Okay. Well, this is how I remember it. And it was back in 2012. Okay. And being a university professor, Antonio was a little guy. That would have made him, I guess, yeah, 6 years old. And we during spring break, okay, Easter break, back then we used to have the week, I guess, before Easter off, okay? And it was April, and we took Antonio out to the Morton Bird Sanctuary out in, I believe it's might be East Hampton or the Hamptons or whatever. And we heard it was beautiful and the birds would eat out of your hands and stuff like that. And we had a wonderful day. Okay. We really enjoyed it. It was very exciting. They did, birds, you'd put a little bit of bird food in your hand and the birds would come right up and stuff. And um, when we were done there, we went down the road. There was a little park and we had a picnic. And Diane put a blanket out on the grass for the picnic. And we didn't stay long. We had a little lunch and we left. And I remember the next day, it was interesting. I guess I was in the shower and I found a tick, um, lower, abdominal area. And it was just starting to embed. Okay. And it was small. It came out, no real problem. I didn't think much of it. No ring, no nothing. Okay. And I told Diane, I do believe I might have talked to my doctor, and he had suggested, looking for if there was a ring or any soreness or signs of blood there or anything. No, there wasn't. Okay. And now this was April. Okay. And nothing. All right. I go back for the second half of that semester and I work through May. And I guess it was middle of June, I started to have little bits of fever. Okay. And in the night, wasn't every night, but every week, I'd have a little bit of a fever. And I thought to myself, I must be fighting some type of summer flu or something like that. And then it was gone. It was done. And a couple days later, I get it again for a little bit. And then I remember it really kind of ramping up to where, I think once or twice I told Diane, I think either I have to go downstairs or you should go. I don't think we should be sleeping together. I think I'm sick. I have a fever, right? But again, it would break after a couple hours and I would feel pretty much normal. Okay. Um, and I remember what happened to me where I made a big mistake was Diane had a brother who wasn't well, and he's passed since, and we knew he was not in a good way. And so we were making trips out to California. Diane was going out more often than I was, but we were going out to visit him. So we had planned a trip. This was really going to be a big family trip to go out to San Francisco, rent a car, go down the coast, and Chris was in like an assisted living place down in Monterey, beautiful community, right? So we were staying in Salinas, all right, which is an incredible place, the breadbasket of our country, right? Del Monte's there. Well, it's I think, 11 and a half months of the year they're farming out there, right? So we fly, and I remember that the trip was scheduled for right after July 4th. So the band that I've worked in for many years, the East End Trio, um, we played a July 4th party out in the Hamptons. And I remember not feeling well when I got to this party. Okay. And the fevers had continued, but they were breaking, and wasn't every day. And I just kept thinking, I'm a young, healthy guy, you know, I'll beat it. A couple days will be over, and that'll be the end of it. And that was a big mistake, because what happened was I went to this July 4th party. We knew the people that were throwing it. We had done it a couple times. So during the breaks, I was feeling a fever, but I would jump in the pool that was there. And I made it through the date. Okay. And at this point, I believe we traveled on July 5th the next day. So I wake up in the morning and I'm feeling fine again. We jump on the plane, we get out to San Francisco, and it's late in the day now. And I remember uh, getting the rent-a-car and driving from San Francisco down towards Monterey. So it was a couple hours. And I just cycle in to what's the first of what became several seriously heavy duty fevers. Scared Diane, like I was really into a big time fever. And as we were driving, she just said, Doug, this is not good. Let's not go to the hotel, straight to the emergency room. So luckily we're down by Monterey, and it's a very nice area. I don't think I had ever, in my adult life, taken myself to the emergency room before. So I go into the emergency room. They look at me. I had good health insurance. I get right into the emergency room. I forget what day of the week it was. Might have been like a Thursday or a Friday at that point. And they thought I had maybe a prostate infection that was making me go into these fevers. So they gave me a heavy duty antibiotic and told me to drink lots of water. And they did tell me if it doesn't break within a couple of days, all right, you need to come back. So here I am, all this money into this trip, 6-year-old, and I'm fighting my way through. And I'm still like the fever would break and I'd have a half day, I would feel fine. Now, at this point, they had increased. They were coming more frequently. But I'd feel good. And then like that night, I would go to bed early, I couldn't tell you how much water I was drinking. I don't think I ever drank so much water in my life, because that's what the doctor wanted me to do. And I was really hoping I was going to get better. I was hoping they found it. Okay. But within a couple of days, we go out to this restaurant that was recommended to us. It was a beautiful California day. So, cool. So, I mean, Northern California. So cool in the evening. And we go, and Diane's just looking at me, and I'm in a fever, and I'm trying to make it through having this meal, and with Antonio and hanging in there. And she just looked at me and she said, Doug, this is not good. And what began to happen, Rich, was I was turning jaundice. I was turning, yellow. And within a matter of hours, we went back to the hotel, and Diane's like, no, I'm taking you back to the emergency room. This isn't working. And, you're sick. And it was a Sunday night. Okay. We show up at the emergency room. They had the records from treating me a couple of days earlier, might have been 3 days earlier. And they bring me in, and they could tell I was really sick. And I was amazed, because on a Sunday night, they started calling in doctors, and it was a teaching hospital, but to run, CAT scans, um, all types of tests on me. And I'm in this, going through these tests all night long. They got me scheduled for tests now. And Diane told them, we come from Long Island. Could this be tick related? All right. Now there was no tick on me that we could find. All right. I hadn't found a tick from between April and that July on me. And boy, I wound up, I just knew I was really sick. So I'm literally, if you can imagine, with this beautiful, son now 6 years old, thinking, what the hell did I do to myself? And they're almost acting and treating it like with the CAT scan, there could be a mass somewhere that's impacting your functions, blah, blah, blah. And they could tell I was turning yellow. So Diana talked to him about the tick thing, but nothing. I mean, I was in tears. I thought I was done. Okay. I thought I really screwed up big time with something and I didn't know what, but I'm lying in between these tests in the emergency room on a cot. I could barely walk and saying my prayers.
Doug, real quick question here. Why did you think it was something you did, right? Because you didn't know what it was yet. So you said a couple of times you thought you did something and you screwed up. What made you think it was an action you took that led to the illness and not something that you just had from genetics or something you acquired from somebody walking by down the street and you picked up that illness? You know what I mean?
Yeah, I'm not really sure, but I thought maybe I had just, and I have a thyroid condition, so I see a doctor every 3 months to make sure my metabolism stays correct. So it's not like I don't go to the doctor. I'm very into preventive medicine. I've felt good all my life and still do. As I've gotten older, there's a few little things, but preventive medicine has been a good thing. So I guess I just was thinking to myself, I really missed something here, and what did I do to miss this? You know, um, and I couldn't figure out what I might have picked up that made me, this was Matt, the sickest I had ever been. Okay.
So when you say that earlier, you said that the fever got worse, right? When you finally landed in San Francisco, it was the worst fever you've ever had. Was it different than typical fevers you'd get when you had the flu, for example? Like, in the wintertime, you get the flu, you get a fever, you bounce back. Was it a different kind of fever? Because we hear that from a lot of people in the Lyme community.
I just remember how it traumatized my body at that point. It racked me. Okay. Sweating profusely, shivers. Okay. The worst, I guess, fevers I've ever had. Right. And that's how I would say it differed. Now I've had the flu and I've had fevers from the flu and I've had it as an adult. Now I take, the flu vaccine every year. So I'm gonna knock wood here, and I haven't had the flu in a long time, but I hadn't been sick like this ever before. So I'm thinking, what did I do to myself? I am health conscious, so maybe not the best, but I just couldn't figure out what I did or who I was, I can't ever remember telling you, man, honestly, that I thought maybe somebody else gave this to me. I just didn't think that way. But
When you just quick jump back again. So when you were in the ER the first time, you said they thought possibly a prostate infection and they gave you heavy antibiotics. I have two questions about that. Did they do any blood work that you recall that maybe indicated you had a high white blood cell count and therefore they thought it was an infection? What led them to believe that? And did they run any other tests that you're aware of during that first hospital visit?
I think all they ran was the blood test. Okay. And I guess somehow out of that, they thought that, it could have been prostate related. And that was it. They didn't run like CAT scans or anything else like that. Okay. I think they did blood tests and then gave me this antibiotic. And I remember them saying, drink water because we bought a lot of water. And boy, I was drinking water out my ears.
Hmm.
Okay. But I also remember too, actually, over the couple of days before it might have been that Sunday where Diane took me back. And I still don't understand all of it. But when I peed, they referred to it as bilirubin.
Hmm.
So I think it was the first time in my life that there was red in my pee.
Hmm.
And I gathered that that was blood, and I knew I was really sick. And Diane is like, we're off to, there's no more fighting this out. Okay, you're going to the back to the emergency room. Okay.
Do you recall what antibiotic it was they prescribed you on the first visit?
I don't. I don't. Um, and I was even talking with somebody the other day. We'll get to it in the story, but what happened to me next was, this night of tests, and I'm not getting better. Doctors aren't talking to me. Diane had explained, she brought up, that there had been Rocky Mountain spotted fever on Long Island, Lyme's disease, all this stuff. They ruled that out, and she had, and then the last guy they brought in was the infectious disease doctor, and he comes in, and I guess from the blood work, he went into deeper tick illnesses. And I'll never forget, they admitted me into the hospital. And the next morning, it was probably 7 a.m., 8 a.m., as I remember it. I'm in this strange hospital. I'm alone, but this guy comes up and introduces himself. And somewhere I have his name down. I don't remember it anymore. But he told me he was the infectious disease doctor. And he said, Doug, he goes, you're sick, but we know what it is, and you'll be okay. Okay. And he said, we can treat it. And he told me I had babesiosis. And, he told me that my red blood cells had been really attacked. He confirmed or thought it was from a tick illness, but he knew what it was and he could start treatment on it. So then he said to me, when do you do to go back home? And at that point, we were supposed to go home maybe in another 2 or 3 days. He said, no way. You're here. This is going to take a while. Okay. And am I correct, guys? I might be wrong with this, and I don't want to steer anybody the wrong way, but he put me on methoprin.
Mepron, maybe?
Yeah, Mepron. Yeah.
Yep.
And they were heavy duty doses. And, I guess got me stabilized. And then, in the hospital, and I'll never forget, it was a really nice hospital, like I said, beautiful area of our country. And windows were open in the hospital, things like that. They let Antonio visit me in this hospital. He was only 6, but he was able to come in like twice a day to visit with me. And I mean, I got to tell you, once I knew that it was treatable, and this guy was pretty much like, you know, we can get you over this. You'll be okay. It's just you're sick. And I just was like, okay, just tell me what to do. How do I do this? I'm a dad. I got to make it through this. And I listened to him. I was always raised. They immediately were in touch with my doctor on Long Island, who I'm good friends with. We're the same age, to my doctor and I. And they told him what it was, and the doctor knew what it was. And then they started sharing medical information. So I was in the hospital, I want to say like 5 or 6 days. I was just like, please, can you get me well enough where I can get home and be in my house, right? So they transferred, I remember it was a DVD of all the medical records and tests and all that type of stuff to my doctor here on Long Island. And I come back and they got my red blood count to a level where they were comfortable with getting me onto an airplane and sending me across the country.
Look, before you go on about being back in Long Island, a few questions about your experience in California. So yeah, Mepron is it's a fun fact. Mepron is an antiparasitic. So Babesia is a bloodborne parasite.
Right.
And unlike Lyme disease, which is a bacterial infection, so they use Mepron, or the common name is Atovaquone for that. And that usually is used in conjunction with an antibiotic as well, like an azithromycin. So do you know, did they combine that with an antibiotic, or do you not really remember how they approached it?
Matt, they could very well have done that. I mean, they put me on a prescribed, and really the prescribed regimen came after I was home.
Mm,
Okay. And I do remember I had to inject myself every day. Okay. In the abdomen. And they referred to it was a malaria drug, right?
yes.
That's what
Yep.
they said it was. Okay.
Yep. And it's an anti-malaria drug that they use for Babesia. Yep. They're both parasitic. Yep.
Right. And the doctor in California had explained to me that they found this parasite in my red, attacking my red blood cells. And he said the reason you were turning jaundice was it had gotten to my spleen but luckily it didn't get my spleen. And he said from there it would go into, it would try and it would shut down your liver and other things. But my spleen was the first, the way I understood it was like sort of buffer to it. And I was lucky because I still have my spleen, right? And I'm really sick. I'm trying to digest this. Um, I just was still in these fevers, but the couple of days in California, they subsided. My red blood count went up, and then they deemed that it was okay for me to go home. Diane was phenomenal and Antonio. First time I was wheelchaired out and wheelchaired into the airport and wheelchaired and dumped on the plane. I don't remember the plane ride or the plane people being so nice, but I made it home. Okay. And my doctor had already told me, he said, as soon as you're home, he knew I was going to be home. I think it was like a Saturday or Sunday morning. He said, you call me, you come to the office, okay, and that day, all right, and I'm going to check you over and I'll draw blood. All right, we'll see where you're at and we'll figure out what to do. And I remember I have a good friend of here on, close to where I live, Charlie, and one of my bandmates, Mike Munzer. Those guys carried me into my house, put me down. All I wanted to do was be home. I forget who it was. The other one carried me, put me back in the car to get me to the doctor's office. Got myself into the doctor's office. They drew blood. I got back home. Somebody carries me in. I'm plunked down, and I get a phone call from Dr. Call a couple hours later. And he said, Doug, you got to get yourself right to Matha. He said, no kidding around here. I said, oh, Dr. Call, can't I just stay home? Can't I
Mather
stay?
being our local hospital, right?
Yes. Matha Hospital, on Long Island. And I don't know if he specifically told me Matha, but that's where we went to. And I remember it being a weekend. And so at any rate, uh, they had my red blood count, which was still really low. And Dr. Call said, so, I'm going to tell you, I want you eating as much red meat as you can, spinach, blah, blah, blah. And I got there. They did give me a couple of blood transfusions. I remember that. And I remember, and before I end the California story, I will say, I remember when I was finally, feeling a little better, I reached out to this doctor out in California to thank him. And I sent him a CD of mine, because I remember corresponding with him in the hospital. He was into music. He would come and treat me and check me. And, he got me well enough to get home. He knew what he was doing. And he found this, which I think at the time was pretty scary because the Lyme thing, certainly on the West Coast, hadn't hit. And Diane did bring it up a number of times.
Doug,
And
I'll tell you from our experience on this podcast, I mean, Lyme and Babesia are misdiagnosed and missed for decades in many cases here in Long Island where it's prevalent. But in California, where it's less common, we hear people go misdiagnosed for lengthy periods of time. So the fact that this doctor and also an infectious disease doctor, so never mind you're in California, but you have an infectious disease doctor, to the layperson, you would think, well, they should be able to diagnose Babesia and Lyme disease. But generally, they're the last doctor to ever actually give you a proper diagnosis. So I do agree. You were very lucky to get that diagnosis from this doctor in the ER while you were in California, no doubt. So couldn't agree more with that.
yeah. So anyway, once I'm here, then I remember the doctor here, and I'm terrible. I could have looked this up, but he was younger than I was, so I think he's still around. Um, but I remember him telling me about the illness, and he he said to me that in all his years of being an infectious disease doctor, he wasn't a kid, but he was younger than I was. And back then, I guess I would have been, that was what, 13 years ago. So I would have been early 50 or very early 50s. Okay. He said to me, he rarely saw babesiosis. That summer in 2012, he had seen more cases than he had ever seen prior to that summer in his career. Okay. And he had the first patient that ever had it die from it. And he explained to me that some people can fight it off and it'll go away. I guess the parasite, they can fight off the parasite. He said other people, Um, it can take months to grab into you, to where you get sick from it. And I also remember for the first time hearing from my doctors at that point that it could very well have been the tick bite in April, and it may not have been. Okay. It could have been a tick that bit me and just made its merry way. Okay. Which I never realized could happen. I didn't think that they would just could do that.
Doug, I have an interesting. Rich just put it in the chat, and I didn't even think of it, but we hear often from doctors that there's a lot of immune suppressing factors that allow these tick-borne illnesses to come out and present themselves in a more serious manner. So you were sick before you went on your flight and traveled to California, but as soon as you got there, you were significantly worse. And we've heard from some of the leading doctors that flight is a big immune suppressor, and therefore it's very possible that that was a big trigger to make you even sicker in California, which I think in your case worked out for the better because you had a doctor who got you a diagnosis, which may not that may not have happened if you stayed on Long Island, unfortunately. So just a
Oh, really?
interesting little fact about that experience there.
Well, I always felt the mistake I made was thinking I was going to fight it off. Strong boy here, healthy, I'll be sick for a couple days and I'm fine. And most everything I dealt with, the flu or anything else, that's what it was like for me. So anyway, once I think I spent another week in Matha, couple of blood transfusions. They got me
Doug, sorry to interrupt you again, but question about Mather, because I was in Mather as well in 2012, 13, and 14, because I was sick, heavily sick those 3 years and didn't get diagnosed until the summer of 2014. And, people listening to this podcast, almost everybody we've ever interviewed have never been from our local area. And for me, it was a very bad experience where they never even thought Lyme disease. I had my mother at the time who was pushing for it, and they didn't really understand the severity of it. So I'm just curious, how was your experience in Mather Hospital back in 2012 when you went in there with an official Babesia diagnosis? Were they more helpful and kind and considerate and caring because you already had the diagnosis and they were trying to help you with that specific thing?
Yeah, I think that was it. I didn't really have a problem with it. It was the first time really I was in the hospital in my life for any real duration. And I didn't like Matha because, like I say, the windows weren't open. I knew I needed to get out of this
Yeah.
place. So again, I have a very good GP that I'm friendly with. He was there for me. Diane talked to him, I think, daily. He's not a runs type doctor, but we were in touch with him, and they seemed to know what the treatment was going to be. Okay, and I did not have Lyme's. I was never diagnosed with Lyme. Okay, but once I landed in Matha with a diagnosis, they immediately started watching that red count. I remember the doctor explaining to me what I had, what they were going to do. Okay, and I spent like another week. They finally thought, I can go home. I was still ridiculously weak. Um, and I got home, and for the remainder of the summer, I think it was another month, I was being watched by a blood doctor that I really liked a lot. She was just a really nice person. She actually wound up being a friend of my sister's. And but she was extremely knowledgeable, and I was connected to her through Matha and maybe Dr. Call as well. Her name was Dr. Clausen. And I think she's retired now, but I really, and she was very confident with me as well. And I remember there was a point in the treatment where I got a little scared because my red count was coming up and coming up slowly. And then it slowed a little bit. And she said to me, by next week, if we don't see it start to move again, we might have to do a spinal tap. And I don't remember, why that was or what you might have been concerned about, or if it got that far. But I remember just going and praying I didn't have to do that, that I would continue to heal. And I did. By the time I got in the following week, she told me, the counts are back on the move in the right direction. She might have adjusted the treatment a little bit, but I still remember injecting myself daily. I set up a nice, like, gazebo tent in the backyard, and I had a pool, a little pool. I would take a dip in the pool, sit in the chair, and read. I mean, I was shot. I couldn't cut the grass. I couldn't do anything. And it took about a month to where I started to feel some energy coming back into me. And I remember the doctor telling me, your blood counts are now where they should be, and you're doing much, much better. And then the last part of this story that I thought was interesting.
I'm going to pause you right there again, Doug. I'm sorry. I just want to ask, did they do anything different in Mather for that 1 week than what you did in California? Meaning, were they still just giving you the Mepron and monitoring you, or did they change up your treatment protocol at all while you were in the hospital because your blood count wasn't getting better?
No, and I think while I was in Matha, it was continuing to get better because they released me from there. And they did give me a couple of blood transfusions. So it seemed pretty routine. And I think I saw that infectious disease doctor a couple more times over the course of the summer, but I saw Dr. Clausen weekly. Okay. And that progressed even after, I was kind of done with treatments and stuff. But I remember going at one point, it was maybe later, mid-August, something like that. And Diane and I have an anniversary, August 1. And I remember her telling me, you're doing good. Your red blood count is getting here. You're feeling stronger. And I was. And, at that point, I said, can I go out and have dinner with my wife for our anniversary? And can I have a martini? And she laughed and she said, yeah, you got the green light. And, you know, that was it. I spent the summer on my back, it was really, oh, and then the last thing I'll tell you is I also see an acupuncturist that I've become friendly with. And for me, he's been very good with a couple of things. I have a little bit of arthritis, and being the drummer, I have an ankle that's been a little swollen. And I think it's from going boom, boom, boom with my left foot the way I do. And he treats it once in a while, and it really helps. Okay. So we're good friends, and we talked a little bit, and he suggested he's an Irish guy, he's a character. And we're very good friends. And he called it a tincture. And he said, I really think you should get a couple of these herbs. And I don't think it's there anymore, but it was a place that was in Setauket. And it was like a medical herb type thing and natural food place. And I remember doing ringworm and a couple other things. Because what he said was he thought that some of that might help me with the last of any of these parasites that might be there and any larva or anything that they may leave behind. So I talked to Dr. Clausen about that, okay, and the infectious disease doctor. Neither of them had a problem with that. So I did it, okay? And as you folks know, I'll never be able to give blood again, okay? But again, I feel so fortunate to be able to say this. I don't really think I feel any effects. And that was the one positive with babesiosis was if you can get it out of you, it's not like Lyme's disease where it might come back at some point. They were pretty confident you should go have a good life now. Be aware, which I am, okay. But you know, uh, particularly, the Dr. Clausen was a very positive experience. She made me comfortable and explained things to me on a level I could understand it. And I felt really by the end of August, I was able to go back and teach. And, Hofstra was very good to me with allowing me, no issues. Because I run an administrative program for Hofstra too. So I'm usually around, but I had to take care of myself, and everybody was good and just covered me. And I wrote all my colleagues. I remember what I did do, and I wish I could find this for you guys, but I looked, but I wrote, it was a couple of page thing, and I might have even sent it. I think I sent it to Newsday. You know, um, yeah, I did. And I remember an article coming out in Newsday back that summer. Okay. I don't know if it mentioned me, but it had to do with the story of this tick illness that was popping up. Okay. But I wrote, crafted a pretty good note that I shared with like everybody I knew because I never realized that a tick could bite you and walk away. I thought they embedded. Right? So, why would you think you have tick illness if you didn't find a tick on you? Right? Big mistake. Okay, and I'm sure you've heard it many, many times from people. I know people that wound up with both babesiosis and Lyme's from the same tick. Okay, they explained to me that the babesiosis came from had to have two meals, right? You normally it was the mouse first, and then a deer. Okay, that's where the parasite was from. So I tried to be knowledgeable about it, but the Meprin really, seemed to be the thing that helped me. And I wish I could remember if there were other medicines or
Well,
anything.
Doug, the tincture that you took, the herbal tincture, did you notice anything from the tincture? I'm curious. So, why did he recommend that? It sounds like just to make sure, like, to be extra safe. And did you feel anything at all when taking that tincture?
Nope, I didn't feel anything negative, that's for sure. And it was only, I remember the way Christy, who does a lot of healing work, and is into a lot of organic things, the way he brought it up was just, in case there's anything left in the larvae or in your bloodstream, these are things that he felt could fight it. And like I say, I try to be a good patient. I was always raised to listen to doctors. And if I have a doctor, it's only happened to me once or twice that I can't understand or can't spend the time for me. I'm not certainly not the brightest guy when it comes to medicine, but if you can't explain it to me where I'm comfortable, I shouldn't be your patient. And I've never had much of an issue with that, but I made sure I understood what I was doing. My wife as well was with me every step of the way. Really, Antonio too. Just he was scared. He never saw me sick before, so we all followed the protocol and I was pretty comfortable with it. So I asked the other two doctors if they had any issues with this, and they weren't so sure it was going to do anything, but they didn't have any problem with it. So I did it, you know. Eh.
Can
So
you share the name of your acupuncturist? Because, for me personally, but anybody listening that's on Long Island, that's a local listener, they may want to consider seeing your acupuncturist.
Well, his name is Christy Harrington. He's in Port Jefferson. I think he's very well known and very well respected. And I know a number of people. I was referred to him. Uh, I don't know. I guess it was maybe even treating my ankle before this, but he's really helped. It hasn't helped me with everything, but it's helped me with a number of things. And I like his approach and his honesty with things. And we've been, I don't see him often, but I remember it being a help. And he's a guy who I think is, um we're good friends, so I don't want to ruin him. But at any rate, he's strikes me as a very bright man, you know.
This is Dr. Christy Harrington, right?
Right.
Okay. So my final question before Rich picks back up is going to be, are you doing anything, Doug, today to maintain your health? Because oftentimes, our life is about balance. And if you had a very traumatic experience and it was a very serious illness and you managed to get through it and get your health back, but sometimes, that does do damage to our body and we have to rebuild and then maintain that health. So what are you doing to stay so healthy today and, remain in a good place of health?
Well, it's interesting you bring that up, Matt, because Diane is a terrific, we've been together 37 years and soulmates and all that stuff. But she also happens to be an incredible, she was a pastry chef, comes from a food family. So we really try and eat well. And luckily we could afford to eat well. We spend a lot of money in our food budget. I don't think everybody can do that these days. We try and eat a lot of organic things. We eat a lot of vegetables. I was always raised, I like to eat. There's nothing I don't like to eat. That's probably my problem. Okay. But the reality is that I was brought up, moderation, which is what I think, still works better than anything. I don't eat red meat 3 days a week. If I eat it one night a week, that's it. If even that, I probably have that, maybe every 2 weeks, pasta one night, fish, one night. So I go in this kind of loop. And Diane's, always the beautiful bird on my shoulder telling me what, and just kind of watching a little bit or suggesting. I do a regimen of vitamins. Okay. And and again, Dr. Call knows my GP knows all those. Okay. And let's see. I do try and exercise. I do like to ride my bike. Diane and I both like to walk a lot. And school keeps me very busy, but and the energy is up. But what also happened to me was when I got into my very early 60s, okay, and I'm 66 now. I didn't realize I was in my 60s. So I did a couple of things where, that impacted me. One day drumming, be, uh, no, it wasn't even drumming. I drum all the time out the vineyards and the wineries and stuff like that. And in summertime, I've been out in real heat. I'm drinking water all the time. I'm drinking water all the time. I had a day off and we were having, it was right after COVID, first family reunion in a couple of years, 90 something degree weather. I go out and I cut the grass. I did all this stuff, and I was going to go down to the beach to take a swim. I did actually go down to the beach. Got back. I go over to this reunion. What I didn't do was drink water. So I'm at this reunion for 2 hours, and I fainted dead away. Scared the whole family to death. Diane thought I had a heat stroke or something, and it was the first time I ever rode in an ambulance. Diane wanted me in an ambulance to take me over. Again, we went to Matha and the emergency room. And I remember an Asian doctor that just, got in my face and said to me, "You're out in 90-degree weather and you're doing things at your age. You have a bottle of water in your hand, and you're drinking that water the entire time you're there." Rich knows, I took it was no fault of mine, but I took a bad bike fall, okay, and fractured my humerus bone. So I had a couple of things that happened, and I realized, okay, I need to slow down a little bit. I still consider myself to be very active, but I think about things. There was one other thing that I think was, it's funny to me because this was when I believe and this might have been the first thing that happened, but I went and I forget. Oh, I'm trying to remember how this transpired, but at any rate, I wound up getting taking Augmentin, okay, and I had, oh, I know what it was. I had a bad respiratory thing going on, and Dr. Call wasn't sure if I had had COVID or not. Didn't think I did, but it was a bad chest thing. So he gave me the Augmentin as an antibiotic to get my lungs cleared out. And it was right around Memorial Day. And I'll never forget, I take this Augmentin for a couple of days and I go, I wound up, I noticed a big patch of red on one arm. Now I'm gardening, I'm outside all the time. And the doctor, and I noticed it and I'm thinking, uh, I got poison ivy or something going on here, right? So, I mean, it's like, Memorial Day weekend. So I went and jumped in the water down in the Sound and figured, the old Long Island remedy, salt water is good for everything, right? And I know as a kid, it always helped with poison ivy. I went over to the ocean. I jumped in the ocean. I mean, it was freezing, Matt. All right. So, but this is what I did. So, like, but the next day I wake up, now there's a patch on the other arm, back of my hand, and I notice a little on my neck. And I'm like, oh, now I got poison ivy all over. What am I doing? And Diane's looking at me. I'm not so sure that's poison ivy. And I'm like, well, I'll give it another day. I'm going to go swimming again. And then she's just looking at me and kind of just like rolled her eyes or something, which she doesn't do to me a lot. And I said, you know what? I think I'm heading over to the emergency room. And I did. I got, and she said, she said, I'll drive you. Okay. So I went over there and they determined it was a reaction to the Augmentin. Okay. So I tested, and then this was strange too, just to give you an idea how weird it is. I go over to the dermatologist to be tested. Okay. And it's an ear, nose, and throat place. And they tell me you're not allergic to it. And they give you a little bit of it to take it. And they call me like that day to tell me that I'm not allergic to it. And by the next morning, I see another red patch on my arm. So I called them and I went over and I said, look, this wasn't here. This is from, the what you gave me. So they did determine that I was allergic to it. But the doctor also, I really remember this. She said, some of the stuff with if you did have COVID, and some of the things that COVID would do to people made medicines work differently. And so I do know I'm, allergic to Augmentin now, but at any rate, this all made me start to try and take care of myself a little better and just at least slow down. And certainly if I have symptoms, jump on them. Okay. And then the last thing I'll tell you is for my retirement, one of my first goals is I do need to exercise more. I'd like to drop a little weight. I'm going to really try. And because I do like to feel good and I've been very active. I'm not banging my drums as much as I used to. And that was good natural exercise that I love to do. So I just need to kind of get back out there and get a kind of a new regimen. I'm still playing and performing, but not on the level. I was doing it quite a bit for a number of years. So it's changed around, I think, my metabolism and all that. So I've got to find some other things to keep me going. And I intend to. But I do feel very good. And I want to maintain that. I'm at a beautiful point in my life. I don't want to ask for a lot more. I just like it to last for a while. So,
So, Doug, let's talk about a couple of blessings as we wind down the podcast. And the first blessing that I want to talk with you about is the blessing of Diane. Folks got to see her because she came onto the podcast, which is kind of a cool thing. But Diane doesn't just have the face of an angel; she also has the spirit of an angel. And I think, unlike you and Matt, I don't think it was the doctor who gave you the diagnosis in California. I think it was Diane. And I think if Diane were not as insistent as she was, and she wasn't as aggressive as she was in making sure that they were aware that you were from Long Island and that we live in a tick endemic community, I think it's likely you would not have been diagnosed with the disease, even though you did have someone who demonstrated himself to be competent once you had the diagnoses. And I think that's typical of, unfortunately, the medical community. In most cases, people are diagnosed not by a doctor, but by somebody else who has had Lyme disease or one of these other tick-borne illnesses. And one of our past guests, Phyllis Bedford, describes Lyme disease as the supermarket diagnosis disease because more people are diagnosed in a supermarket than they are in
right.
a doctor's office or a hospital. So it's actually the angel, also known as your wife Diane, that I believe was responsible for your diagnosis.
And I agree with that because Diane was all over this when she had no idea specifically what it was, but when she knew how um, sick I was and saw how sick I was because I was never, thank God, a sickly man. So she jumped on it, and I think she was somewhat insistent. And at least there, they were open to it. And I think, and I remember the doctor that the infectious disease doctor, I can picture him today. He was smart and he was kind, and I don't think he had any issue with pursuing. I got really lucky. He went further than like the Lyme or thing and just dismissing a tick illness
Yeah.
or Rocky Mountain spotted fever, or something. The which I would personally would think are probably the two most spoken about ones. He dug a little further and found this parasite.
Yeah, yeah. So, Doug, another one of the blessings I think is that you had gotten sick when you had gotten sick, because we're actually seeing just in the short 5 years we've been doing this podcast, we're seeing different combinations of bugs now. One of the things we used to hear early on is people would be diagnosed with Lyme disease or Borrelia. They would just have a single bacteria, and now we seem to see in almost every case this trifecta of Borrelia, Lyme, Babesia, which was what you had, and Bartonella, which is a really, really nasty bacteria as well. And when those three bugs come together, the diversity of symptomology and the migration of symptoms makes it very difficult to diagnose any one of the three. So we're seeing a lot of changes in the environment. We're seeing a lot of changes in the germs that these ticks are picking up and harboring. So I think blessing number two for you, quite frankly, Doug, was that you had only one bug and it was easier to diagnose than if you had this combination of bugs dogpiling on you and ultimately making it not only difficult to diagnose but very difficult to treat.
Right. I don't disagree with you, Rich. In ways I felt very fortunate after this. I've known people who've had really trying, conditions from Lyme disease for many, many years. And I went through a really tough summer. I mean, there were a couple days there I didn't know if I was going to make it, but it ended itself. And I just hope, I always in the back of my mind, and to go back to one of the things, Matt, excuse me, that my doctor is good with, I do every 3 months for my thyroid condition. I do a yearly physical all the time, um, and get checked for, any prostate issues, other things, the things I think you should be doing. I'm not the best patient, but I certainly try to be pretty good and follow a regimen, again, prescribed by my GP. But he checks also my red blood counts consistently to make sure nothing's changed around. And I had a little episode a couple of years ago where I went for one blood test and they saw, I forget what it was for. It was a specific, oh, it might have been part of this augmentin thing that they sent me, for a blood test and another, uh, I, it came back and, oh, it was when I went to the emergency room at Matha, for what wound up being the augmentin issue. I have Matha reach me, and Matha says, uh, "It looks like you had a case of Rocky Mountain spotted fever." And I said, "What are you talking about?" Blah blah blah. And they asked me to see an infectious disease doctor. I did. It wasn't the same one I had at Matha, and I saw my GP. And they said, no, what they think it is, there's a certain thing in that blood test where you have babesiosis, okay, it elevated a level, okay, that was not where I was going to be sick from it, but it was slightly elevated from, I guess, other people who've never had any of this might have. And they just said, Dr. Call, my GP said, this is something I watch every year. It hasn't changed, and you're not at a level you're going to be sick from this, but we watch it. So I know I have people around me that are watching this. I ask them about it consistently, and more than anything, I genuinely feel good and hope to for many years.
Amen, Doug. So, and the third thing I wanted to share with you as we wind down here is one of the things we've learned here at Tick Boot Camp is that the risk of contracting Lyme disease is actually formulaic, and it's threat times vulnerability. And we focus on the threat element with you, where you were coming in contact with ticks, in the tick endemic community. But then there's the vulnerability piece, and I think it's important for us to talk about this because, as our society develops, we are becoming more vulnerable. And part of the reason why we're becoming more vulnerable is because our immune system is being tested by a number of different things, or being repressed by a number of different things. Some of it has to do with the American diet changing radically and the types of foods that we're ingesting. Some of it has to do with the amount of chemicals, especially petrochemicals, that we're coming in contact with on a regular basis. Some of it has to do with the amount of plastics that we're ingesting, especially airborne plastics, which are passing the blood-brain barrier. Um, some of it has to do with just the stresses of daily life and the social stresses of daily life. And I think it's important for us to help folks to focus on these things and understand that we have to be much more vigilant today than we ever did before. And I think, again, one of the reasons why I believe you had a shorter path than maybe other folks did is, and the reason you probably had a more robust immune system is because you focus on your health on a regular basis. Knowing you personally, I know you're really careful with your diet. I know that you exercise regularly, both walking and biking. I know that you have a strong spiritual practice, and you and your family are spiritual people, and you have a very diverse spiritual practice. You're very social people, but you have healthy social relationships, and you don't spend a lot of time with toxic people. So there are a lot of different elements of this, Doug, again, that I know personally because of our personal relationship, that I think allowed you to have a robust immune system. And because you had a robust immune system, despite having this bug overwhelm you, you were able to overcome it quickly. And then, of course, your rehab was shorter as well, despite it being a whole summer where you were really sick, because you went back to those practices. So I think you just, to help our listeners understand how important it is to be aware of the many threats and the many challenges that are making us more vulnerable. And again, we could also bring climate change into that as well, that are making us more vulnerable, and how your important choices of making sure that you're not around toxicity, whether it be physical, social, or spiritual toxicity, allowed you to both have a shorter path to recovery and ultimately a shorter path to rehabilitation.
Uh, Rich, I couldn't agree with you more. I mean, that kind of centered me through all this and still does. All right. Because you're a good enough friend, and I'll extend this to your audience. I hope that there's another couple of good chapters in the book and a lot of years to come. But I tell people I've gotten more out of this life than I ever expected on a number of levels. And because I've been a university professor for so long, I find myself, sometimes teaching a lot more than TV when I tell my students two things. Part of the teaching, okay, find yourself a career you really like to do. And I know you've done that. I've done that, right? And if you leave yourself enough room to find true love and a partner in your life where there's love involved, okay, you've got the two key elements, all right, that have led me to what I truly believe is a beautiful life. Diana and I have never put ourselves in much stress, which is ridiculously hard to do, not to do, these days. So I don't sit there and worry about, that type of thing. I don't live lavishly. You're never going to get rich being a university professor, but I do what I need to do, and we live what I think is a very nice quality of life. And I have another friend who's a doctor, and he does, some psychological work. And he told me, he said, you would not believe how many patients I deal with that are in toxic jobs that they really don't like, and in toxic relationships at the same time. And they're sick on a lot of levels. All right. Even if they're good people, you just get into these situations, and good people don't walk away. Right. So I do thank God on a daily basis for what I have, and I've never had to really even think about that. I couldn't have been in a better healing environment once we knew what we were dealing with. And I did use that to my advantage, and intend to, it's my philosophy with medicine at this point. Eat good, know when you don't feel good, go to your doctor. My dad lived to be 85, very healthy till he was 84 and a half. Okay. And then he got sick. They found cancer in a couple of places. And he did he didn't choose to go through surgery and all that. He did hospice the last part of his life. But he was very clear to me of what he wanted to do, and told me I've had a wonderful life, and I don't particularly want to leave, but I don't want to die in a hospital, and I don't. And his philosophy, and I bring that up because he had a GP when they moved down to North Carolina. He loved, and he listened to this guy, and 84 years is pretty good, and and his doctor said to him, you can go in for surgery and you can do this. I don't think it's going to buy you much. You've got this in your pancreas now and your liver, just tiny spots, but it's there. So, I think it's key too to have a GP that you like, and that's been
Yeah.
essential to me.
So for absolutely, I mean, and so having we have control over how we're going to allow the toxic soup that we're swimming in and the impact that that's going to have on our vulnerability. We have the ability to learn how ticks behave and how we can avoid coming in contact with them. And when we recognize that we have control over the risk of coming in contact with Lyme disease and getting sick from Lyme disease, because we can both control the vulnerability and we can control the threat, it puts us in a position where we're in control and we can have a healthy outcome. So Doug, thank you for sharing your really beautiful story with us. And congratulations on a great career. I'm really, really happy for you and your family that not only that you're retiring and going to enjoy some more quality time with your wife and your son before he begins his college career in August. But also, I'm really happy for you that you've been recognized for all the great work that you've done at the university and that your students have appreciated all the contributions you've made to them and their lives.
Thank you, Rich. It's been a beautiful time in my life. And as I said when we started, truly blessed and old enough and wise enough to know it. How's that? All
Perfect.
right. Thank you, guys.
Thank you, Doug.